Well, hello and welcome once again to another episode of the 360 Experience podcast. I am your host, Tim Braheem, and I'm super excited to have a conversation today with Brian Mahan. Now, Brian Mahan is an expert on the subject matter of somatic experiencing therapy. And you may not have heard about somatic experiencing before, but it is a growing, widely accepted modality of healing that is available across the United States and across the world. And Brian's been practicing for 20 years. I was a client of his, a patient of his, if you will, for many years. And my wife is currently working with him, so I can attest to the power of somatic experiencing. Now, you may be saying, what is somatic experiencing? How would this apply to me? Here's the reality of it. We have all experienced trauma, anxiety, fear, and deregulation in our life. And most of us experience it every single week in our work environment and our home environment. And it is pervasive and it affects our experience of life. And Brian is a practitioner that helps people release old wounds and old trauma. We're going to talk about it in the context of business. We're going to talk about it in the context of your personal life as well. In this episode, you're going to learn what the difference is between talk therapy and even coaching versus somatic experiencing work, and the difference is vast. You're going to learn about the origin of this field of practice, in particular, the founder of it, Peter Levine, whose book, Waking the Tiger, is an epic book. And you're going to learn how to practically create purpose in your life, which will happen in the second half of the conversation, which is a beautiful formula that Brian outlines. So sit down, relax, get ready to take some notes. This is going to be a really valuable episode for you in so many ways in your business and your life. And it's certainly one that you can listen to with your children, with your spouse, and forward along to friends. Now, before we get started with this episode with Brian Mahan, I just want to remind you that if you're not subscribing to this show, please do. The more that we have subscribers, the more that I can get people like Brian to come on the show. I would also encourage you to forward this along to anybody you think might find it to be valuable. Make sure, if you would please, that you are giving us a like if you like this episode and making comments on YouTube if you're watching it there. As always, this episode is sponsored by the Loan Atlas. And without further ado, my conversation with Brian Mahan. Brian, you look fantastic, man. Like really, like you look 10 years younger than the last time I saw you.
That's crazy. I'm going to be 59 next month.
You look fantastic. Your skin looks clear. You look happy. You were telling me offline that you're living in Mexico now. Tell everybody where you're living. You used to live in LA.
Yeah. So
where do you live now?
In Merida, Mexico, in the Yucatan. It's a beautiful 500-year-old colonial city that a massive city has grown around. And it's considered the second safest city in all of Latin America and the safest city in all of Latin America and the second safest city in both North and South America.
Wow. That's incredible.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. We were in San Miguel Allende a little over a year ago. That also seems like a really safe city too.
Yeah, it has had that reputation, but I think it's gotten a little bit more dangerous in the last year or so.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was good for us. So we all got out of there alive. So that's a good news. So, where do we begin? So, in my intro, I talked about the fact that, I've known you for, pretty close to a decade now, although I haven't seen you in, a few years. It's probably been a good 3.5 years since then you've been working with my wife. And again, thank you for the time that you put into her. So how long have you been practicing somatic experiencing? And give us an overview of what somatic experiencing is, because I have a feeling that most people tuning in don't have context around it. I think it's very important for them to understand what somatic experience is.
Well, absolutely. Well, I just realized, I don't know, a few weeks ago, that December 21st this year is the 20-year anniversary of my car wreck. And my car wreck is what ultimately led me into this work. And so I was in a catastrophic car wreck on December 21st. My car flipped end over end and rolled 3 times across 3 lanes of traffic and slid on the driver's door 150 feet and crashed into a concrete wall. So, a bit of a life event. And subsequent to that, I started having panic attacks. But I didn't know they were panic attacks. I thought I was either going crazy or had become possessed. And in the mania of panic attacks, I had convinced myself that it was the latter. And so I sought a referral for an exorcist. And thank God she sent me to a somatic experiencing practitioner instead of a priest. And so after 3 sessions with a somatic experiencing practitioner, my panic attack stopped. And I haven't had one in 20 years now.
Wow.
Within 2 weeks of that session, within 2 weeks of my panic attack stopping, I entered the training. And it's the work of Dr. Peter Levine. It's taught in, I think, 130 countries and 25 languages or something now. And it's considered the world's foremost approach to dealing with trauma. And we look at trauma through a different lens than traditional talk therapy or psychology, psychiatry. So we look at it more of how the brain and the nervous system become disorganized and dysregulated as a result of overwhelm or underwhelm. So extraordinary events, whether they're something like my car wreck or obviously acts of war, and then also the little t traumas. So things like shame. And so that's really where one of the main focuses of my practice is, and has been for the last several years, is working with the trauma of shame. And we have to look at them as physiological conditions, not as psychological disorders. And so somatic experiencing is thought to be a short-term therapy, a naturalistic approach, a bottom-up approach. So rather than traditional talk therapy is kind of a top-down approach, and somatic experiencing is a bottom-up approach. So we're dealing primarily with the physiology, and as a result of that, then a lot of the psychological components that can happen in the aftermath of traumatic events can also get resolved. But what I've noticed over the last 20 years of doing this work is that what ultimately ends up happening is my clients' beliefs start changing. And as their beliefs change, their behaviors change. And so nothing changes until our beliefs do. Our beliefs drive our behaviors become habituations. And so we can try to manage symptoms, we can try to change behaviors, but they're oftentimes short-lived because the underlying belief that is driving those behaviors is still in place. And so anytime we have a traumatic experience, whether it is something physiological like a car wreck or something that's more insidious like shame, we form beliefs. We form beliefs about ourselves, about the world at large, about the other people involved, the location, the situation, the behaviors, whatever's going on. And those belief systems drive our behaviors, form our personality, and ultimately, and to a great extent, create who we are and how we see the world and how we interact with it.
That's a great high level summary. So I'm glad I asked that question. I appreciate the answer very much. So I'm going to want to drill down quite
Absolutely.
a bit. And as I said in the opening, I apologize in advance to the listener if I'm clearing my throat. I'm dealing with a little bit of a flu right now. So I imagine that somebody that's listening, tuning in is saying, oh, well, I don't have any of that. And right. I'm under the impression, having done this work with you and having done a lot of work around both psychology and somatic type work and other forms, that we all have traumas. I remember Gabor Mate, who I'm sure you know Gabor. I mean, he is a legend and really a terrific teacher. I remember him saying in a documentary that I was watching that trauma is relative. So what might be traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you or your sister or somebody else who grew up in the same household. I'd love for you to speak to that. And let's also start to talk about how trauma impedes our life experience. And maybe you could give some examples.
Sure. So to concur with Gabor, so any two animals or any two humans carrying out the same behavior at the same time in the same location can have two completely different experiences. For one person, that might be an exhilarating experience, and for another one, it might be a terrifying experience. And how we respond to events is oftentimes predetermined by not only our instinctual responses, which are without thought or reason, but also based on our life history, just the day-to-day of our lives. Now, one of the reasons that we look at trauma specifically now as physiological and not psychological is that we can become traumatized pre-verbal, precognitive, and preconceptual. So before we can think and reason and put things into perspective, we can become traumatized from the birth experience. So if we can become traumatized before we can even rationally conceptualize it or think about it, then obviously there's another system at play, and that's the lower brain, not the higher brain. The higher brain is kind of our thinker, and the lower brain is our behavior. So it's the freeze, flight, fight, freeze, flight, fight, fawn response that all human beings exhibit as a defense mechanism against any kind of threat. So it is relative because everyone sees the world and interacts in the world through their own lens, which is based in their previous life experiences and the beliefs that they form as a result of those experiences. But I know that that you have people that that have a tendency to be in a constant fight response, and others who have a tendency to be in a state of collapse or in a frozen response, or some people who are kind of runners who just avoid situations and people in conflict in their lives. And so that's one of the ways that we look at perhaps someone is traumatized, is that they've gotten stuck in a basic defense response based on their history. So
And that basic defense response is tied to their beliefs, which drives their behavior, and it's based upon past experiences,
right.
Whether they can remember them or not, is what I'm hearing you say.
Exactly, because we have two different kinds of memory. Or more than two, but two main kinds of memory. The first is implicit memory, and that's the body memory. So the body remembers things in a way in which we don't necessarily remember them explicitly, because we think of memory as explicit memory of having images and thoughts and emotions and all of that. And so this implicit memory can exist is online and part of our experience, in utero and through the birth process up through that developmental stage where we begin to be able to think and reason. And the explicit memory neurobiologically doesn't even come online until about a year and a half to 2 years old. And so we're influenced by both. But the crazy thing about explicit memory, the way we think of memory, is that there's research that shows that the memories that we have of our own lives are 50% accurate.
Yeah.
So
half
what
the
I know
stuff
about
the stuff we think is made up.
exactly. So there's all kinds of filters through which all of this information gets into our brains and gets into the cells of our bodies and creates neurological pathways, right? Because not to get completely academic here, but what we're looking at in healing of anything, right? Healing of any type, we're ultimately looking at neuroplasticity. We're looking at rewiring the brain. And so if you imagine these beliefs and these behaviors and thoughts clusters and that kind of thing that are all bound together that drive certain kinds of behaviors, that's like a neural pathway. And it's a neural pathway that's created from repetition consistently over time. And so in order to heal, we either have to clear out the short circuits in that neural pathway, or we have to create a new neural pathway. And so there is a neurobiology to healing. And it does require repetition, because that's just how the brain fires and wires, is through repetition. Now, go ahead.
Let me anchor in a couple of things that I've heard from other sources for you to confirm and just summarize. So 50% of the beliefs that we have are not even true. Okay. And I presume that those beliefs are in place because they're there to protect us. We fabricate in order to keep ourselves safe. This is the ego's job, is to think into the future and to structure a defense strategy. Okay, and I'm going to get in a moment to how this plays out in business, because I think it'd be good to anchor that into that just for a moment. But then additionally, what I've also heard is that we have somewhere between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day. And that those thoughts, roughly 80% of those thoughts that I've heard different statistics, are the same thoughts we had yesterday. Now, going back to my days at the University of Santa Monica, I remember when Ron Holnick was facilitating one of my fellow students, and the student was saying, I'm aware of the fact that I am caught in this thought loop and I don't want to think it anymore. And he helped him reframe the thought into a different circuitry. And then he said, now, how many times do you think you've had that thought? And the guy said, like hundreds of thousands of times over the course of my life. And he goes, so what makes you think just if you change the thought now, it's going to rewire it? You're going to have to do the work to rewire those thoughts in your brain, which is what you're speaking to here. Do you want to say anything further about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's brilliant. So there is a lot of conjecture and new thought that all we have to do is, if we have a negative thought, we change it into a positive one. But again, to what you just said, if we have habituated the quote unquote negative thought tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of times, then how do we think that just changing it now to a positive thought is actually going to effectuate any kind of change? However, here's the real question I have, is if we notice that we have this negative thought loop or these intrusive thoughts that keep plaguing us, rather than just trying to change them, what if we were to get curious about them instead and lean in and wonder, why does this thought keep coming up? And as I'm having this thought, what starts happening in my body? How do I start to feel? Now, if we can direct our attention inward into what we're feeling, because we feel everything we think about, and we think about everything we feel. So we have the thought come in, we meet it, we greet it, we acknowledge it, we get curious about it, lean into it, allow the thought to be there, notice what starts happening in the body. In a simple way, is there an emotional charge that comes in with that thought? Then what do you think about having that emotional charge? And so there's a loop that we can get lost in there too. And so one of what I like to do in those moments is, when this thought comes in and I have the feeling that it correlates with it, if I hang out in the feeling of that and I notice how and where I'm feeling what in my body, I can ask myself, is there anything old and familiar about the way this feels? And in that inquiry, the higher brain is a diligent servant, and it's going to try to find answers to your question. And so you might notice, yeah, this is a really old and familiar feeling. And then memories can start bubbling up of previous times in your life that you had a similar thought or similar feeling or similar thought and feeling together. And you can continue to kind of lean into it and feel into it more as each kind of memory comes in. You hold the space for that memory, you notice how your body shifts and changes, what you start feeling in that, and then you inquire again. How much earlier can I remember feeling this? And we might be able to, especially if you have the help and assistance of somebody guiding you through the process, get to the original wound where that original belief was formed and where those thoughts come from. And then we can actually work on that emotional charge that's in the system to get the neurobiology, to get the nervous system to unwind and discharge that emotion, that old stuck emotion that keeps looping. And then the nervous system can return to greater resilience and find its equilibrium again.
I have so many questions and so many things that I want to comment on. So as I mentioned to you before we hit record, I just got done spending 7 days in Cancun at a Dr. Joe Dispenza meditation retreat, and it was incredible. And a lot of his work is in alignment with what you do. And one of the things that my wife and I were talking about is that, like when you sit with yourself for 5 hours, because one of our meditations was 5 hours,
Mhm.
You can't escape the habitual thought patterns that continue to cycle. And one of the things that I was working with was some physical ailments. And what became very clear to me is how riddled by fear I've been my whole life, and how it's driven so many behaviors, so many actions, so much of my personality structure is based upon fear. So as an example to make this practical for people. So one of the things that I've been working on for a very long time is patience and my desire to be kind to people, especially people that I love, that are my colleagues, that I work with, or my family. And what will happen is that I will often find myself in a situation, especially if I am with someone who likes to talk slow and pontificate and go into detail and wants to collaborate with me. And the feeling that I used to describe it as was, I feel like I'm falling off a building to my death. Like, it's that
Mm.
severe. Now, I know the source. The source is a situation or several with my father. And what I'd like you to talk about, and maybe you could either use my example as an example or pick another one, but I'd like you to go a little bit deeper into the actual process of somatic experiencing, because I think it's very important. I can't count how many times you said to me, "Stop, I don't need the story.
Right.
What do you feel in your body?" Let's go there and let's talk about that. Please explain that.
Well, first of all, Tim, never pray for patience, or you will be standing in the grocery store line behind the person with all the coupons. The universe will provide for you plenty of opportunities for you to experience impatience if you
Yes.
pray for patience. So, yeah, so these feelings that we get, the the value and importance of feeling what we're feeling is based actually in some seminal research that was done by Dr. Eugene Gendlin at the University of Chicago. He did a 20-year research trying to figure out why some patients were getting better and others weren't in a therapeutic practice. And what he found was, after 20 years, that the relationship between the practitioner and the client was very important, that the techniques that the practitioner was using needed to be in alignment with the problems that the client had. But the single most determining factor as to whether or not anyone gets better in any practice with any practitioner is based in the client's ability to feel sensations in their bodies, to language those sensations appropriately, to then attach the right emotion or affect to that cluster of sensations, and then establish the right meaning or belief about having that emotion, feeling that emotion, and expressing it. So the foundation of the body-mind connection in the therapeutic practice began from this seminal research. And it was where Dr. Peter Levine and somatic experiencing was kind of born. And so that is why like you said, would stop you all the time and say, okay, let's see what would happen if you drop out of your head and into your body and feel what's here. Because there is this body memory. If a baby is crawling across the kitchen floor and uses the hot stove as leverage to try to stand up, even before that baby can think and reason and speak, and the body needs to remember that white box is hot and not to touch it ever again. So this is an implicit memory. It's without any kind of thought or reason or perspective. And so when you are in that place of feeling the impatience and feeling like you are falling to your death, do you have any sense, memory, or recall of how and where you were actually feeling what in your body at that time?
Yeah, the oldest memory that I can access is, and it's not a specific event, but it's an event that happened numerous times, where my parents had this like stained glass window on their front door. And when my dad would come home from work and he'd pull into the driveway, the headlights would shine through that stained glass and like pixelate it.
Mm.
And what I've been able to do is trace it back to the terror that I would often feel when I saw those lights. because I didn't know who was going to walk in the door, and I had to really protect myself. So that's like probably 5 years old type feeling, I'm guessing.
Right. So you did a great job of discovering what the triggers were. And the question is, what was that terror? How did you feel that terror in your body? What happened inside of you when you would see those colored lights dance across the walls as the car pulled up in the driveway?
That I can't remember.
But you remember it was the terror of not knowing who was going to walk through the door.
Yeah.
Was it going to be good dad or bad dad?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. There were so many incidents where he, one time I touched my teeth to the tines of a fork, and he got mad at me and reprimanded me, and I was crying, and because I was crying on the next bite, I did it again, and he like slammed his fist on the kitchen table, screamed at me, stormed out of the house, and didn't come back until the next day. Like that kind of like crazy, unpredictable behavior. And I have to presume that the place that I felt it, for two reasons, I presume this was in my solar plexus, in the pit of my gut. And there's two reasons for that. One is because I've historically had health challenges there, and they're clearly energetically related. And secondly is when we did our work together and you would take me back into old memories. The primary place I would start to feel nauseous, and I would start burping, and it was like sour, and it was like really bizarre that like all of this acid was coming up in my digestive tract just by experiencing an old memory. So right. I think that's a fair statement that that's where it's from.
Right. So the terror that you felt is the terror of falling out of favor. Yeah. As infants and children, instinctually, we understand that if we fall out of favor, we die. And so even now you have this feeling of you're falling to your death, right? We feel as though we're going to die because we're hardwired as infants with a longing for belonging and therefore a need to please. Because our lives depend on others. We're the only animal on the planet that spends 25% of its life 100% dependent upon others. So the terror of the breaking of that interpersonal bridge, the loss of that relationship on an instinctual level can equate to death. And what we're talking about here is shame. Shame is the terror of the loss of that relationship. It's the terror of falling out of favor, rejection, neglect, abandonment, being cast out or shunned. And all of that could lead to our death. And so that's why, I think shame is the original wound, the moral wound, and it's life and death for us.
So here, again, to anchor it in for the listener. So here's how it plays out. Okay. So because of that shame, because of the terror of falling out of favor, the greatest body of work that I'm doing personally right now at 56 years old is learning how to draw healthy boundaries and say no to people when they request my time. And the reason is because I have operated my whole life from that place of fear of not being in favor, and then therefore say yes to everything. Exactly. And create this dynamic where I'm constantly feeling like I'm falling off the building because I have so much shit to do, and anybody that slows me down puts me into a situation where I feel the fear of death. It's that extreme.
That's it. And so when someone speaks very slowly and really takes their time in trying to engage with you, your higher brain is like, dude, I got 100 other things to do. I've got to survive. I've got this, so there's so many balls in the air right now. I don't have time to slow down and sit here and be a subject to your pace and rhythm. Yeah. And at the same time, you have this internalized drive to remain in favor and connected. Yeah. And so there's that longing for belonging and the need to please. And at the same time, there's the internal conflict of, how am I going to, do everything in a day that I need to do in a day in order to maintain my world and life as I know it? So
continuing on, because I think I hijacked it a little bit. So you go into your body and
Hmm.
you feel a sensation. Let's say it's tightening in the jaw, or dullness and sadness in your chest, or pain in your neck, or something in your abdomen like me.
Hmm.
What do you then do with that to help rewire and regulate the nervous system, as you mentioned?
Right. Well, this is the difference between what historically we would call catharsis and what we're learning we can do now is actually process emotion. So catharsis is just a release of steam out of the pressure cooker. It's just an expression of emotion. And then the valve closes and the steam builds again. There's no real healing that transpires just from an emotional outlet or expression. But when we can slow things down and we can break that emotion down or that feeling down into its individual sensations, then we can bring our attention awareness into one of them and get curious about it and willing to feel it until it begins to resolve. Because ultimately, sensation is language. So it's the language of the nervous system, which is governed by the brain, right? So our bodies are talking to us through sensation. And the most important part of any communication is listening. And so we need to learn how to listen to our emotion by feeling it. So to give an example, if anxiety, let's say, is a combination of an elevated heart rate, trembling and shaking hands, pressure in the chest, pressure behind, or a heaviness in the chest, pressure behind the eyes, expression of heat, clammy palms, right? There's all this stuff that's happening all at once. This thing, these sensations are firing all over the place. Then our higher brain starts to think about it. Uh-oh, I'm feeling something. Something's wrong. I got to fix it. I got to change it. I got to get out of it. And then we distract ourselves or disconnect from it or, try to shake our hands out. We're doing all this thing to try to change what we're feeling. Whereas if instead we could be willing to sit in the discomfort, to feel all of these different sensations, and then we can ask ourselves, of these 6 or 7 sensations that are going off right now, which is most tolerable? So maybe that is the sweating on your palms. And so you bring your attention awareness into just feeling the sweating on your palms, letting it be there, noticing, isn't this fascinating? My body is starting to perspire out of the palms of my hands. And if you just hang out with that long enough, the nervous system will start to regulate and that will abate. Then you can come back in and go, okay, now that that's not here, what's the most tolerable? Well, maybe that at that point, it's the heaviness on your chest. And so you bring your attention and awareness into becoming curious about feeling that heaviness, right? My definition of intolerable is it's time to go to the emergency room. So if I don't have to go to the emergency room, I can tolerate it. I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't want to feel it. I wish it would stop. But if I'm able to tolerate it, if I'm able to get curious about it, if I can be with that heaviness on my chest, imagine it. Maybe it's, you have the image of an elephant sitting on your chest or, one of those great big what are those big iron things that Wile E. Coyote used to,
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. I don't even
you
know what
know,
those things were, but I know what you're talking about.
an anvil. So, so you can picture that anvil, sitting on your chest. You can feel the weight of it and the pressure of it. And you can realize, you know what, this isn't sending me to the emergency room. I can handle this. It's uncomfortable. I don't like it, but let me feel it. Let me just stay with it. It'll start to abate. Now we don't have anxiety anymore. We have something else. Anxiety was the collection of the 8 sensations or symptoms. Now we have 6. So we're actually processing this, right? We can do the same thing with sadness, with anger, with fear. Um, and it's a way of paying attention and allowing the body to express itself the way that it needs to, and for us to listen to it simply by feeling it. And then the nervous system can unwind and discharge and reorganize and return to equilibrium. And that's where we want to be, right? We've come to believe that if we feel anything, something's wrong. But we want to feel. We want to, a lot of people, just want to feel the happy, joyous, and free, and the ease and the peace and the calm and all of that. But that's unrealistic. That's an unrealistic expectation. We are, we are sentient beings. We feel all kinds of things, and all of the things that we feel, if we can reorient to it as this is communication. It's important. it needs to be paid attention to. It needs to be felt. And there's a reason for it here. It's trying to get our attention. Maybe there's something here that I can learn from, or I can grow from, or I can heal from.
Let's talk a little bit more about Peter Levine. The book, I believe, unless there's another one, is Waking the Tiger, correct?
Yeah, he's got several. His other kind of more academic one, the Waking the Tiger is more for the layperson, and then his more academic one is In an Unspoken Voice.
Waking the Tiger is an amazing book. I read it many years ago per your recommendation, but I absolutely loved it. And I want you to talk about the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response,
Sure.
and maybe define each of them, because I would imagine that every single person will be able to then relate to at least one of those archetypes.
Sure.
And then tell the story about the parrot, I believe, hitting the plate glass wall and discharging the energy. I believe that's the story.
Right.
And why humans have the inability to do that, which is why this work is so important.
Right. So first of all, Peter Levine's book, Waking the Tiger, is a great book. Great book. It's a great primer. And Tim, there's another one, shameless plug. My
Perfect.
book, I Cried All the Way to Happy Hour. And in the book, I do talk about freeze, flight, fight, and feign, and all of that, and a lot of the things that we're talking about. It's a book that I wrote as a primer. I wrote it so that my high school educated, 86-year-old mother could understand it. Yes, that we get into some neurobiology and things, but I speak a lot in narrative, and it's actually probably the only book on trauma that'll make you laugh out loud. So there's a lot of humor in it as well. But to get back to this, so we have these instinctual responses. They're non-cognitive because we don't even have the capacity for cognition for 18 to 24 months into our lifespan. So we have these internalized survival strategies: freeze, flight, fight, and fawn. So freeze is actually the best response to any kind of threat whatsoever, whether you are a predator or you are prey. And it's the system slowing everything down, getting really small to hide, because if we can hide from our threat, it might not continue to come at us. It may not be able to find us, right? So we get really still and quiet. And it also gives us a chance to assess the situation. Is this danger real? Is it really coming for me? Is it going to pass on its own? Now, if we get to that place where we realize it's still coming for us, then our next best response is to flee, to try to get away from it. We conserve energy and we reduce risk by trying to get away from our problems. Then the next response is to fight. And so that is the greatest risk. We have the greatest potential of getting hurt. It takes the greatest amount of energy. And somewhere in the mix of all of that is this fluid response of fawn. And that's when we might try to ingratiate ourselves or, appeal to our perpetrator to spare us, right? And then that fawning can also be the people pleasing and, trying to remain in favor, right? So these are fluid responses. They can change from and they should change from situation to situation, from relationship to relationship, from one moment to the next. But as I said earlier, sometimes we can get stuck in one of those, or we can get stuck in one or two of them. So a lot of people have this feeling as though they're moving through their lives and they've got one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake, and they just can't seem to find that sense of flow. And so that also is kind of a sign that the nervous system is actually dysregulated. Now, the story you had talked about with the bird flying into the window. So a bird is, joyously in flight, doesn't see that doesn't understand what glass is, doesn't see that there's a pane of glass there, and it flies head on into the glass and is knocked out cold. Now, if the bird is left alone, more than likely, as it kind of comes back and its nervous system is able to kind of process the impact, and all that energy is able to kind of shake out and reorganize, the bird can oftentimes fly off. But if someone runs over to attend to the bird and picks the bird up as it's coming to, it now is perceiving a completely different threat. And so the nervous system can shut down again. And sometimes the bird can even, the nervous system just fritzes out and the bird can die from that. And so even though we think we're helping the bird by running over, we're like, have the knowledge of what to do with, an unconscious bird. But, we have that compassion and care, and we go over and we try to scoop up the bird, because we want it to live. But that might be actually the worst thing for it, which kind of brings us back to earlier our conversation where, one animal or one human can have a completely different response to an experience than another, right? And so all of this is, in its most basic form, of physiological, right? Even shame is a physiological response. So when we feel that terror, like you would feel when the lights change colors on the wall, there was the terror of falling out of favor. And what happens in that shame experience is our brains get scrambled so we can't think clearly. Our larynx constricts so we can't speak. We break social engagement, which for you may have been run and hide.
Yeah.
Or we can get frozen through immobilization, either through bracing against the attack or through collapse into futility. There's no point. Why bother? I'm not going to be able to win this situation, right? So even shame is initially a completely physiological survival strategy to a nearly impossible situation. And that is, what happens if I fall out of favor and I'm rejected, neglected, cast out? I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you talked about the fact that when the fetus is in your utero, it's still having experiences. Now that might be something that might be difficult for people to get their head around, because if our thoughts create our beliefs and our behaviors, and this is pre-thought possibilities, what's
I have to stop you
causing
there. Our thoughts don't necessarily create our beliefs and our behaviors.
Okay.
Events we form beliefs about. Experiences
Okay.
we form beliefs about. Those beliefs then can drive behaviors, and those behaviors can become habituated. They become habits, or they can become parts of our personality, the ways that we react and respond to the world as a whole.
So how does a fetus in the womb of the mother formulate, like, how does it cognitively formulate based upon the experience? Or I guess it doesn't.
Yeah, there is no cognitive formulation at that point, but that's where implicit memory comes in. And we also have to remember that the fetus in the womb, when its nervous system is being formed, it's being formed in the energetic resonant field of the mother's nervous system. So if the mother is going through a very stressful, difficult time while pregnant, then that nervous system is getting encoded in the energetic resonant field of the mother's nervous system, of her emotional life. And so that child has a predisposition towards, if the mother's in a very fearful state while pregnant, then that child might have a greater propensity to be fearful when it is on the other side of the womb, when it's left the womb, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If the mother is, despondent while pregnant, that child may have a tendency to, lean towards hopelessness, or that, the fear response, right?
And is that an energetic experience?
Well, it's energetic in the sense that our nervous systems are driven by some sort of energetic, energy, right? We know we have an energetic field, we have a magnetic field, we have an electrical field. So that's all part and parcel of it. So there is a biology and a reality to energy, right? You wake up some days, like right now, today, I would imagine you have pretty low energy. You're not feeling well, right?
Yep.
Your energy, your life force is redirected right now towards your immune system to try to fight off this invisible assailant from within, right? You have some sort of, cold or flu, or God, I hope it's not COVID, but you have some sort of something going on inside, and it's this inescapable attack. And so your energy, your life force has to be directed there. And so you don't have as much vitality to move through the day. Just like our gut, to take you back to your example of how you were aware of how much your gut was involved in your threat response. It's everybody's gut is a major player in their threat response. Because if you think about it, we have a threat. We either need to quickly hide, right? Everything contracts, our arms and legs, and we move into the fetal position to try to protect our vital organs, right? That all that energy has to go into the arms and legs to go into the fetal position, or all that energy has to go into the arms and legs in order for us to be able to run, or all that life force has to go into the arms and legs in order for us to fight. So all that energy is now being moved away from the lungs, the heart, the viscera, the gut, and into the limbs. So if somebody has a situation where they're under chronic threat or chronic, the potential for threat, like you, every day when your dad drove up to the house, your system went into hypervigilance, right? So when somebody's energy or somebody's life force is in that high state of arousal for a very long time, all that energy has to move away from the gut. And so the gut atrophies. And that's why a lot of times with trauma survivors, we see things like gut issues, whether it's colitis or irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, et cetera, because there's an atrophy. The organs aren't getting the life force, the energy that they need, because we're in a constant state of having to move it into the arms and legs to prepare ourselves to defend ourselves by whatever means.
What are some of the most prevalent issues that you work with people on that are in business? Is there like a theme that you see that's consistent?
Absolutely. I don't think I told you. I recently taught 1,000 women worldwide in the IT department for JP Morgan Chase. And I created a training for them called Breaking Through Your Own Glass Ceiling. And so there is the question in business, and what is it that inhibits one from climbing that corporate ladder or finishing their daily tasks, whatever that might be, whatever responsibilities they have. There are those people who show up in the midst of those challenges and they thrive, and there are others who are inhibited in the midst of all of that. And so part of that can be a shame response. And so in order for us to kind of break through our own glass ceiling, we have to take a look at, what are our own beliefs, our own limiting beliefs. We may have, and they may be unconscious beliefs. We may have the cognitive determination to thrive and succeed and achieve, but we may have an internalized unconscious belief that we don't deserve it, we're not worthy of it, we're not good enough.
And that belief will typically show up somewhere energetically in the body if you explore it.
Yeah, I mean that's usually in a stuckness or a stagnation or an inhibition or a collapse. But it's for me, I think what's more important in figuring out what is it that's holding us back as an individual in business is first to figure out what's holding me back as an individual in life, and my own sense of self and the beliefs that I hold and carry about me. And most of the beliefs that we hold and carry about ourselves aren't self-generated. They come from the perspectives that other people share about us, right? So early on, we get all these messages of what people think about us, what they say about us, who they think we should be or not be, what we say and don't say, what we do and don't do. And all of that, we form this inner critic to protect ourselves. So if if I have a parent who's constantly telling me that, I'm lazy, I'm going to come to believe that I'm lazy, even if I'm not lazy. It's just I'm not interested in, math, right? So, if you're, if a parent is saying, you need to do your homework, why are you so lazy, et cetera, et cetera. We come to believe that we're lazy. And then we form this inner critic to police ourselves. What do I need to do or say or not say that's going to increase the likelihood that I'm going to remain in favor? So we start to um, self-edit. We edit our thoughts, we edit our words, and we edit our behaviors so that we can try to remain in favor. So we even say, in the experience of shame, we're multifaceted personalities, right? There are many parts to us. And in the shaming experience, especially early on, we're learning that there are certain parts of us that are unlikable and lovable, and that we need to dismember them. We need to hide them. We need to kill them off. And then in healing shame, we actually want to be able to expand back into our true authentic self, which means remembering those old dismembered parts. Because in healthy shame, we can recognize that just because I've done something stupid in the past doesn't make me stupid. Smart people can do stupid things. Loving people can do hateful things. Kind people can hurt other people. It doesn't mean that we are mean or hateful or unkind. We just have those moments because we live in a polarized universe, and of course we do, right? Everything has to exist, and even within us. So in as much as we can be kind and generous, there's also the capacity for us to be miserly and not want to share what we have.
Tell us about, since you're working with juxtapositions there, about healthy aggression. I think this is a topic that we spent some time on that's very important, that was really eye-opening for me.
Well, so healthy aggression is what I call the positive polarity of anger. Now, we normally think of anger in its negative polarity, which in its most extreme expression is harm of other and harm of self. So homicidal rage, suicidal ideation. That's the most extreme expression of anger. On that end of the scale, we live in a polarized universe. So the opposites of everything have to exist. So if harm of other and harm of self is one end of the scale of the expression of anger, then the other end is self-care, self-preservation, care of others, and protection of others. So if your child were in danger, you would move into healthy aggression. You would do whatever you needed to do to protect your child.
For sure.
So there is a positive polarity to anger, but we've been socialized to believe that anger is bad, it hurts other people, it has no place in society, and we've also learned growing up oftentimes that if we expressed our own anger, we ended up getting hurt. We got smacked across the face, put in the corner, sent to our rooms, kicked out of the house. So the beliefs that we have around our anger inhibit it. If we're unable to express our anger in any form externally, towards someone else or something else, then that anger gets internalized, so it gets expressed towards ourselves. So in the healthy expression of anger, there's this thing called healthy aggression, and that is the capacity to set boundaries and to protect them. Now, if we have healthy aggression, I'm going to use an example here, which I actually kind of detail in my book. If I have healthy aggression and I have a desire, because boundaries are about needs and desires. What do I need? What do I desire? And then we set boundaries, or we have to have boundaries around those to ensure that our needs are met or our desires are met. So if I have the desire to be able to walk down the beach at 59 and turn heads, that's going to require me to develop a bunch of boundaries for myself. I have to develop the boundary around what I put in my body, what foods I eat. I also have to put boundaries around what I'm not going to put in my body, how much alcohol I'm going to drink or not drink, et cetera, et cetera. I have to put boundaries in my calendar to make sure that I get to work out as consistently and regularly as I want to. And I have to be able to protect those boundaries. So if I go out with friends and we're celebrating and everybody's ordering the chocolate cake and the champagne, I have to be able to hold the boundary for myself. What matters to me is to have this experience of walking on the beach and turning heads. That matters to me more than having the chocolate cake and the champagne. I can still be here and celebrate and have a great time without the chocolate cake and the champagne. And I have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning for my workout. So I'm caring for myself, self-care, self-preservation, and maintaining that boundary and protecting it. If I have my appointment to go to the gym at the trainer and a business colleague says, I need to get on the phone with you, are you able to hold that boundary and say, I can get on the phone with you in an hour and a half, but I can't right now, because what matters is that my needs and desires get met so that I can turn those heads, I get to the gym. Now, if we're able to set these boundaries and protect them, we have what we call discipline. And we know how important discipline is in business. You have to be disciplined in order to thrive in business. It's the same thing with being able to turn heads at the beach. So if I have discipline, then with that comes drive, dedication, chutzpah, vim, vigor, vitality, vibrancy, inner strength, empowerment, self-confidence, self-esteem. And so I can't have self-esteem and self-confidence without a healthy relationship to anger.
Mm. Why do people have such a difficult time setting boundaries? I think it's a common thing. People who
Because
let their boundaries be loose.
they're afraid of what other people are going to think. And they're afraid that they're going to hurt someone by setting their own boundaries.
And the way that you work with them on that is going into the body, recognizing the somatic experience of what developed that belief, that there's something wrong about taking good care of yourself, and then recalibrating and re-engineering a new way of being.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes the reason why we have, that we have self-sabotage, perfectionism, self-destruction, that's all shame related. And so all of this kind of comes as a result of doing the deeper work of healing the wounds, because until that happens, it doesn't matter how much discipline we have. How many times, Tim, have you, just to stay on this analogy, how many times have you been focused and hitting those workouts on a regular basis and eating really well and everything is going great, and then all of a sudden you realize it's been like 2 weeks since you've worked out and you've been drinking too much or eating wrong foods and all of that, and it's almost as if you didn't even notice it happening. Or you could like wake up in the morning and go, you know what, I don't want to work out. The other morning I woke up, there's a great bakery here in Merida, and I ordered this beautiful little chocolate cake, double layer chocolate frosting. I woke up on Sunday morning, I ate that whole damn thing with a pot of coffee. So we can have those moments too, right? We can have those moments of celebration, but it's also, we can have those moments where we're punishing ourselves, right? Where we're eating that chocolate cake until we're sick, because we feel like we deserve it. We don't, one of the things I noticed over 20 years with clients who can't get better, or they get better and they pull back, they fall back in old patterns, that is a sign that there's shame, because the shame says you don't deserve to get better. You don't deserve to have those experiences that you're striving for. Even though we can have all the cognitive conviction in the world, we can read all the books, we can practice all the practices. But if those old limiting unconscious beliefs are still there, they'll always win.
What have I not asked you that I should have asked you that you'd like to talk about?
Oh dear. I don't know. Well, I mean, if we were to kind of bring this back to business, let me ask you a question. What do you think is the greatest challenge that the people that are in your mastermind group and the people that you teach, what is it? Because you've been doing this for a long time. You've got, and you're conscious and conscientious, you've got to be able to sit there sometimes and just scratch your head and go, God, if they could only get, then everything would unlock for them. What is it that you think
Well,
is the biggest?
there's there's obviously, different categories of people. I mean, there's some people that are high achievers and they have their own list of things that are the common denominators that are their challenges, including myself. But I'd say that the largest group of people are people that have a difficult time keeping themselves disciplined and accountable. Like there's things that they know that they need to do to be successful. In the case of the mortgage business, developing relationships with people who can refer them business, staying disciplined to follow up on their consumers that might be ready to borrow money. Staying focused on their marketing strategies to get them in front of people, and they have a very difficult time doing it.
Mm-hmm. And so from your perspective, what do you think is underneath that? Why do you think they have a difficult time with their discipline and their consistency?
I think that what it really boils down to more often than not that I find is a really interesting dynamic is the fear of success seems to be very pronounced. It's like I see a lot of people get to the 5-yard line and they can't punch the ball into the end zone. They self-sabotage. And that's because they would have to shed an old archetype of who they think they are. If you walk around all the time as a victim, making excuses for why you can't be successful. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily verbally. It doesn't necessarily happen verbally. It could just be the tape that is perpetually running in one's head. It would make sense that once you get close to having that, you would pull up short. And why would you pull up short? Well, because if you gave 100% and it didn't work, you would be left with that shame that you're deeply afraid of. Whereas if you subconsciously know, I never really gave it 100%, it's very subconscious in my experience from watching people, then you always have that as your fallback. That's what I see a lot.
Yeah. Shame.
Yeah.
The original wound coming back to haunt you, right? And that's why I say shame drives self-sabotage and perfectionism. They're hand in hand. Sometimes, we have unrealistic expectations. And there is this phenomenon of, we actually saw it a lot with the millennials because they got all the, the participation awards. And so they had this kind of sense that they knew they didn't deserve the award, but they got the award anyway. And therefore, it kept them from striving to actually do better the next time. On the one hand, because they didn't need to. And on the other hand, what if they did try harder and they didn't do any better? And so they could save themselves that by not doing it at all. And so therein lies that relationship between perfectionism and self-sabotage, right? So, the self-sabotage on the one hand is, if I really bust my hump and I don't make it, I'm going to fall on my face and I'm going to look like such a loser. And the other side of it is, well, if I don't give it 110%, then I won't have to feel the pain of not succeeding if I gave it the 110. So it's a real catch-22.
Yeah.
And I think there's another piece in here that's kind of, sidebar. There's a difference between having a sense of purpose and having goals. And I think when people are entirely goal-driven, they have a tendency to fall short of them. Then the shame spiral ensues, and it makes it even harder to keep going and set new goals. And the bottom line is we don't want the goal. We want what we think what the experiences we're going to have as a result of having achieved that goal. So if there's a goal, I want to have $10 million in the bank. Until that moment, that person feels like a failure. They're not there. They're not enough. They haven't gotten there. There's something wrong. And they work harder and harder and harder and sacrifice everywhere else in their life, their relationships, their family, their health, everything, because they are set on this goal. But the real question is, if they had the $10 million, what experiences would they have in their relationship What experience would they have with their family? What experiences would they have in their health? What experiences would they have in their spiritual pursuits, their intellectual pursuits, their, life as an animal on planet Earth? That's really the question. And so if we can get greater clarity onto the experiences that we want to have in life and understand that the money or the achievement or the plaque on the wall and all of that stuff are just stepping stones leading us towards that. And all of that is being driven by a sense of purpose, then the goals aren't really what matters, because goals are constantly needing to be readjusted, as we go through, right? Just because we have a goal doesn't mean that it's a straight line in that direction. We have to constantly bob and weave and reassess, what am I doing that's working? What am I doing that's not working? What more do I need to do? What less of the other things do I need to do? But if we had a strong sense of purpose, and that drove every area of our life, right? For me, I have a very strong sense of purpose. My purpose is to heal and to help other people heal. I know that I will never be able to be fully healed. And I know that I will never be able to fully heal or help anyone fully heal or everyone on the planet fully heal. So my sense of purpose, I can never fully achieve. And therefore, it can be a driving force in all areas of my life. So what do I need to heal in my finances? What do I need to heal in my primary relationship? What do I need to heal in my friendships? What do I need to heal with my family? What do I need to heal with my health? What do I need to heal in my knowledge and understanding, right? So that's my sense of purpose. I can apply that in every area of my life, and I can align all of my goals in that. And when my goals are not in alignment with my purpose, then I'm off track.
And how does one identify their purpose? Because I think that there are people that don't really know what their purpose is.
Well, yeah, it's one of the more challenging things that I work with clients, because Americans are so goal oriented they can't even wrap their minds around this concept of a sense of purpose. But I'll tell you a story, and this is not my information, but I'm going to tell you the story so that it makes sense. So I had a friend of mine who had been best friends with Janis Joplin. Okay, the singer Janis Joplin, right? And they were sitting around
Sure.
one night, and he said, "What is it that makes you tick?" And she said, "I want to be the greatest rock and roll singer that ever lived." And she was sober at the time. And then what was to be her last album is getting ready to be released, and Rolling Stone does an advanced review, photo of her on the copy, headline, greatest rock and roll singer that ever lived. And she was dead 9 days later from an overdose.
Wow.
She met her goal.
Wow.
What else is there? Right? So he was one of the top casting directors in Hollywood, and he quit his job at the big studio, and he went to India and contemplated his navel, and did all the spiritual practices, was lost in the Rama Lama ding dong of it all. What's it all about, Alfie? He didn't know what end was up and how life could be the way that it was. At any rate, his whole journey came down to this discovery that Janis had goals, and he had goals. And what neither one of them had was a sense of purpose. And so when he looked back on his life, he realized that one of the things that he had always done with people is to help them to dispel their fear. Like, one of the reasons why he was such a successful casting director is when the actor walked in the room, he was able to help them settle their fear so that they could perform at a higher level. And that was something that he had always been challenged with his entire life, is he had been riddled with fear. And so he was always, kind of pushing the boundaries and stepping out of his comfort zone into the fear to try to heal heal his relationship with fear. So he gave me a little formula. You have to be able to describe your sense of purpose in as few words as possible, 2 or 3 at best, at most. I mean, not at most, but at best. And if that sense of purpose you could add on to and help others to, right? That's the highest expression of a sense of purpose. So I have the sense of purpose for myself and to help others too, to be of service with that. The second rule is you can never fully achieve it, because if you can, it's a goal. So that's the greatest determinant. Is this a purpose or is this a goal? And the third is you can apply it in every area of your life. It doesn't matter whether you're focusing on your your education, your mental fitness, or your physical fitness, or your financial fitness. Your sense of purpose should be in alignment with that. You should be able to align yourself within your sense of purpose in all of those pursuits. And so in a sense, you can use that sense of purpose as the sounding board for all of your thoughts and words and actions. Is the way that I'm thinking in alignment with my sense of purpose? Is the way that I'm speaking in alignment with my sense of purpose? Is the way that I'm behaving in alignment with my sense of purpose? So at least we know when we're off track, and then that's where we have to course adjust, right? Because I mean, even a plane, when it is on autopilot, it is going to land at that exact longitude, latitude on the great planet Earth's surface, but it's off course 80% of the time. Autopilot isn't to keep it on track, it's to put it back on track when it goes off course.
What a beautiful metaphor.
Yeah. And so in business and in the pursuits of our goals and our dreams and our aspirations and the experiences that we want to have in our lives, it's not a straight line. We're off course most of the time, and we have to course correct. And if we had a strong sense of purpose, that is the easiest way to align with what is the right decision here, what's the right choice here. And that can be applied in anywhere in business.
How do people contact you? Are you taking clients first of all, or is it something where it'd be better for them to just look up somatic experiencing elsewhere? I mean, I don't know what your situation is.
Well, it's a little bit of all the above. I never say that I'm not taking clients, because my job is to get my clients to quit seeing me. So I have a tendency to have more turnover than other people in the field. But that's not to say that I don't, at this very moment, have a full practice. But what I do is I have a cancellation waiting list. So that's one way people can get in to see me rather quickly, because I might be able to get somebody in next week or the week after just from the cancellation waiting list. And then as clients turn over, I move through that waiting list pretty quickly as well. So you can get a hold of me anywhere on social media. My username, my handle is at Brian D. Mahan, SEP. So BRIAND as in Douglas, Mahan, MAHAN, SEP, Sam Edward Paul. So Somatic Experiencing Practitioner. So Brian D. Mahan, SEP. My website is briandmahan.com. And email, for what it's worth, is just my initials with SEP. So bdmsep@gmail.com. Well, and check out my book on Amazon.
Yes,
because that's
please.
a great place to start, right? I wish
and again, the name of your book.
The book is called "I Cried All the Way to Happy Hour."
Okay, it's a great title.
And I tell the story of the title in the beginning of the book. It's a great story. But I wish that people who can't get into my calendar, people who can't afford to see me, would start with this book on their journey. Like, if this could be their first book, I think it would fast track them in their healing journey. I do think it is important and helpful to have support when dealing with trauma and shame. And the resource for other practitioners I would recommend is traumahealing.org. It is the practitioner listing for somatic experiencing practitioners worldwide. So you can kind of put in your, zip code, if that matters, if you want to see somebody face to face. I'm lucky. I've been seeing people on video for 18 years now. So I have clients all over the world.
Well, I remember our first session was on Skype. If you want to date us, and you and I have actually never met in person, which is crazy to me, because we've been on some video conferencing platform or another dozens and dozens of times.
And what I lived 45 minutes away.
Yeah. We lived very close to each other at one point. And I just want to say that I'm grateful to you for all that you've taught me and how you've helped me. I'm grateful for you for your time today. And to everyone listening, I really highly recommend that you look into this work with Brian in a lot more depth. And as he said, at least start by reading the book. This is very different from talk therapy and very, very powerful. And Brian, thank you so much, man. You got to go get some more chocolate cake this week?
You bet. I'm living La Vida Loca in Mexico.
Right on, bro. Really nice to see you. And I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode of the 360 Experience with myself and Brian Mahan. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.